And it's statistically proven to give us the best outcome with the kids, and that's shown in our recidivism rates. So when you start looking at a recidivism, and that's been proven again and again over the last 3 or 4 years, they consistently come up with recidivism rates with civil citation that run somewhere in the 4 to 5% range. So it's not just a one-time blip on the radar, wow, look at this, and we're going to play that out. It is consistently shown year after year to see about a 4 or 5% recidivism rate. I kind of explained this a little bit about how it reduces our costs. This slide does kind of give you some broader costs associated with some of the different interactions. You know, when you start talking about the professionals in the state attorney's office, public defender's office, and the judge, those costs add up very quickly. Not only that, you're going to have costs that are built into that with the clerk of the court. All of this adds up to a tremendous expense for kids that go through judicial programs, and even for kids that go through non-judicial programs. So I kind of explained a little bit how this works, and I'm going to put my readers on because I can't see without them. So, you know, this slide talks about first time, but it can be up to 3. The law enforcement officer is going to interact with them. The first thing that they're going to do is they're going to be in touch with someone in our office. We've got a group that operates 24/7 to do the initial assessment. They also are responsible for doing screening on kids to see if they're detention eligible or not. But the first thing they're going to do is call and say, hey, is this kid eligible for civil citation? And my folks are going to look at, has he ever been arrested before? Has he received a previous civil citation? And was he successful? That process usually takes about 3 or 4 minutes. The officer then, they make that determination, they issue the civil citation. That comes then back over to my person that's running the program. She does the needs assessment with that kid, and then she's going to look at the total child and what that assessment says in order to make a determination as to where she's going to send the case. Now this kind of gives an idea of what's available throughout the state. In Escambia County, we've really kind of got 4 resources, and I'll show those on another slide, that we can refer kids out to have for those sanctions to be supervised. If the child goes through the program, he's successful, there's no arrest record, there's no criminal record, there's nothing. They can get away with, as they fill out applications, I've never been arrested, I don't have a criminal record, they don't have to worry about that. And we're very controlling of that paperwork, in that we don't want to have multiple copies of these reports out there, because if they're successful, after a year those are destroyed. So it's not just there's not a record, but there really is a record. It's really there's not a record of these things. Let's say that the child goes through, he doesn't cooperate with the program. What happens? Well, what can happen is we'll refer those cases back to the state attorney's office, and then they'll make a determination, are we going to file a petition or not? If we're going to file a petition, they have the full gamut of judicial options available to them. That's one of the other things that with the program is, I've heard from people in the past that it takes options away. It does not. It actually adds more options, because we still have the same judicial options that we've always had. Instead, we're being out in front of this, giving them an opportunity on the front end. If they're successful, we don't have to. If they're not, we still have all of our typical judicial and non-judicial options available. So, who's eligible? You know, when they first passed this legislation, it was very much only for first-time offenders. In 2015, they changed that statute to allow us to do the second and the third citations for kids that successfully completed the program. So no longer did we have to worry as much about the previous arrest history. You know, we could have, hey, we can still have a kid that's had interaction as long as they successfully completed it. The other thing that came out in that legislative change is that the law enforcement officer, if they opt to arrest a child that's eligible for civil citation, they have to document why. And that really has been the order of the day for our law enforcement agencies since we rolled this out. We didn't have to have the 2015 changes in the law in order to get to that point. Our law enforcement officers here have always had to, if they're going to arrest a kid that's otherwise eligible, document why that is. So while there's discretion available to the officer, they still have to articulate, if little Johnny was eligible, why didn't I issue that civil citation? And you know, there are certain instances where little Johnny is really showing his behind. And in those cases, maybe he shouldn't have, depending on all of the interactions that are going on, maybe the most appropriate thing is to do the arrest and then let us sort it through the non-judicial process. So the eligible offenses, it says Escambia County, but this is really for all of Circuit 1. Because the chief judge, state attorney, public defender are all representative of the 4-county area. There are 19 charges, they're misdemeanors as you can see. While that doesn't say all misdemeanors, when we did data polls on this, it did represent about 97% of the juveniles that were arrested for misdemeanor offenses. So while it's a finite list, it still encompassed 97% of all of our misdemeanor arrests. A couple of things that you do notice on the list, it's not just nonviolent, because battery, if you look down, resisting a merchant, those are both, could be considered violent offenses. And on those offenses, the victim does have to approve of having that civil citation issued. There's, like petty theft, there's going to have to be victim approval and no restitution owed, because we don't have a method with which to collect restitution on things that don't go through some form of either judicial or non-judicial program. Some of our sanctions that we use locally now, the community service not more than 50 hours, that is specifically spelled out in statute. The other sanctions that we can use are the counseling. We use substance abuse and mental health services primarily provided through Lakeview Services for kids that aren't necessarily able to afford those services. If they can afford, they've got insurance, then they can use private providers to get those if we say you need it. We're going to monitor what's going on with them in school. It says restitution, that's not really a piece of the equation for us. And then letters of apology. But we're not necessarily limited to that. The lion's share of our kids in Escambia County that receive civil citation wind up going through teen court. And teen court does a really good job of developing some very creative sanctions. They really pull the kids into that program. There's a lot of restorative justice principles that run through that program, so that in the end, you've got a kid that has a better understanding of how they impacted their victim, which is kind of one of the key pieces of this. Like I said, we've got services where we make referrals to teen court. We no longer use Neighborhood Accountability Board. We've got another provider that contracts with us that we use. Community arbitration is one that we certainly use, and then we carry a number of cases just on our DJJ caseload as they go through this process. Some of the advantages to completing it, obviously, as I talked about, it avoids a lot of unnecessary costs. We do the assessment based on needs so we're not just kind of throwing stuff at the wall and seeing if it sticks. It better uses our resources. One of the things that I kind of expected as we went through this is that we were going to see a higher number of white youth receive civil citation opposed to black, but it is actually exactly the opposite. We're seeing a larger representation of our black youth, female youth, Hispanic youth than we did our white youth. So, you know, I was a little concerned that it would be utilized more with the white youth than the other youth, and that didn't happen. In the end, the big key there is no criminal record, and it does absolutely enhance our public safety, and that's one of the keys that we try to emphasize to everyone. And we use this presentation with our law enforcement officers. They sometimes can be more resistant than others because, you know, we all know law enforcement officers show up on the scene, they want an immediate result, which means usually somebody going to jail. So it's kind of difficult for them to embrace a program that doesn't necessarily result in that immediate result. The other thing that was a good selling tool was the part where I talked about the length of time that it takes to work through the process, and the length of time that we're connecting kids with sanctions. That was a big selling point. So unsuccessful, typically the biggest things that we've encountered, you know, there's a number of things listed, but the biggest thing that we've encountered have been kids that don't want to go to school, don't want to cooperate in school. And the probation officer that runs this for me does a really good job of working with them and getting compliance. We have got some real good numbers with that. The other thing is the failure to do the community service work. Those are the two big things, and we don't have a tremendous number of kids that fail this program, and I don't have the statistic with me, and I should have had, but I didn't. But I think we run around 6 or 7% failure rate. So she really does a fantastic job of getting kids to work through that program. And you know, she'll tell you, if I had my probation officer, she would tell you, I really want them to succeed. And she really does, and works very diligently to get to that point. So this is one of those things that we use when we're talking to the general public, what can we do to help? The two biggest problems that we run into with civil citation, and we're going to see on the next two slides the numbers that we're issuing. Participants are required to admit the offense. If they want to challenge the legality of that offense, if they want to say, I didn't do it, their only option is to go judicial. That is the only option. They can't go through civil citation. They can't even go through a non-judicial program because the way the legal system is designed, they get their opportunity to argue, they get their attorney by going through the judicial process. The other problem that we have is victims not agreeing with on those that require. And it kind of goes to the whole idea in society in general right now that I want my pound of flesh. I want some sanctions for this kid. So helping the victims understand that this does connect the child much quicker to many times the same sanctions they would get if they were to go through the judicial process. We're just doing it on the front end. Those are probably the two things that we encounter the most in terms of hurdles with allowing a kid to receive a civil citation. This data pull that I've got here is recent. I did get this one just yesterday or the day before. We're running about 2 months behind on our numbers, which is about normal. This first slide is civil citation countywide, so it's going to be everything included. In February, we had 60%. We typically, for the year, if I was to go through all of that, we're running about 50% utilization. So about 50% of the kids that are eligible were issued a civil citation. In the school system, it runs more like 70 to 75%. So January and February we're at 64. If you look there in August, they were at 100%, but they only had one. But that's because, if you think about it, they weren't in school most of August. That's why you then see in September and October the huge increase in the amount of citations that were issued. They were 86 and 81%, which, given some of the restrictions that we've got, that equals almost 100% utilization, because by the time you build into the issue that you run into with the victims having to approve, whether or not the parents of the child who's getting the citation agree, because they have to sign off on that citation, all of the hurdles, when we run around 80 to 85%, that's almost equivalent to running 100%. So this was information from an independent study that was done. Escambia County, this was 2 years ago, ranked 10th in overall utilization throughout the state, but we ranked 29th in the number of arrests throughout the state. So you can see we generally do a pretty good job in the utilization of that. And then the next slide, so I got too quick. All right, so I'll just read this other slide. This deals with school-based civil citation. We ranked 6th in the state in utilization and 38th in the state of